Bill Randall, 650. Dorothy S. Ma'am, the Axelwide and Peppermint Endurance Company in Bashful Johnny C., home of the grand old conglomeration, Fanny Hill University, and the bathtub of the South. It's 7:30.
I have come here to chew bubble gum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubble.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, I have to tell you, welcome to the bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon. You're gonna have to belly up to the bar. We've kept you a seat. It's great to see you back. Dink is gonna be your bartender tonight. Dink. Dink? Well, she pours with the best of them, and the lava lamp is in fact lighted, as you can see to my left, your right. If you're watching on YouTube, you can be listening on Spreaker. You can be watching on YouTube on the SHR Media Network YouTube channel, and you can be listening live on shrmedia.com. And there's so many ways to listen to what we've got, but the most important thing is we don't water our drinks, just like we don't water our conversation. Politics, religion, crime, culture, economics, race, sex, science, law. We talk about it all here at the Saloon. Nothing is sacred, the speech is free, but the booze is not. All we ask is that you flush the toilet, floss your teeth, jiggle the handle, do a dance, and don't forget to tip your waitress. Tonight, it is Tuesday, August 8th, the year of our Lord 2017. We have something special for you tonight. We have thriller author Terrence McCauley, who's going to be calling in at 8:15 left coast time, 11:15 right coast time, live and direct from New York City. New York City! I had to do that. I'm sorry. As low as that was, I had to do that. You know, you never hear the end of this. And then it kind of trails out. That's a song that I had customized by a band called Possessed Tranquility. And they are at reverbnation.com. They're a great group. I keep trying to contact them because I'd like to talk to them, how they make their music. And I send them emails, and they just don't answer me. We're going to do a couple of things before. I haven't done this in a long time, so I figured, okay, I got to do that. I've got to do happy stories and good times. But before I do that, we're going to play this because I just happened to listen to this the other day, and this is so stupid that it's wonderful.
And whether she was already dead when the truck hit her. We have new information now also on the plane crash. KTVU has just learned the names of the 4 pilots who were on board the flight. They are Captain Sum Ting Wong, Wee Tu Lo, Ho Lee Fook, and Bang Ding Ao. The NTSB has confirmed these are the names of the pilots on board Flight 214 when it crashed. We are working to determine exactly what roles each of them played during the landing on Saturday. Investigators will...
Can you believe that? You know, I have to say, the American media maggots say something similar to, well, you know, we're wonderful. Did anyone in the newsroom, anyone at the editor's desk, not look at the copy and say, no, that really can't go on because, for God's sake, that really cannot be the names of the pilots involved. Does no one read the copy before it goes on the air? And the obvious answer is no. They don't read a damn thing. That's why that is, in fact, the gift that always keeps on giving. And I'm going to do that now, and then I'm going to do some happy stories, because after that, it's not too much happiness until we talk to Terrence McCauley.
It's time for happy stories and good times.
And in terms of happy stories and good times, here's something that occurs mostly in the South and in trailers. Wait a minute. This is, the headline on this is Elderly Homeowner Shoots, Kills Suspected Home Invader. Well, just from the headline itself, I got to tell you, that's going to be a happy story. An elderly homeowner in Lakeland, Florida, shot and killed a suspected home intruder early Saturday morning. The incident occurred at a home that sits back in a wooded area off Deason Road. According to WFLA, so that's a clue, it occurred in Florida, the elderly couple awoke to sounds of someone inside their home. The elderly man grabbed his gun and shot the suspect, killing him on the scene. 10 News reports that the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office identified the suspect as 33-year-old Shane DeShane. There you go. That's why he turned to a life of crime, because his parents didn't like him at all. That's like naming your child Mark DeMark, or Marky Mark, or Bill DeBill, or Biff DeBiff. Good God, parents, note to parents, you got to give your kids a chance. Every once in a while, you got to give your kids a chance. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department indicated that DeShane was also a Deason Road resident, so it's a local guy, and lived, in fact, quote, just a few houses away from the elderly couple's home. However, investigators have no evidence that the elderly couple even knew DeShane. HCSO did not report how many times DeShane was shot, nor did they report where he was shot. Well, I know where he was shot, in the damn house. They simply pointed out that DeShane was dead by the time deputies arrived. Let that be a lesson. Sometimes it's best not to screw with the older people. Speaking of not screwing with the older people, apparently North Korea is not getting that particular message. And I can say that because President Donald Trump is 70 years old. And North Korea, President Trump is attempting to broadcast a message as clearly as possible, but I fear that China, Russia, North Korea, etc., the rest of the bad actors in the world, have not yet grokked the concept that this is a new man occupying the White House, and these are different times, and that the philosophy of the current White House occupant, resident, is not, let's see, strategic retreat, leading from behind, or any of those other stupid-ass phrases. What did occur recently, I find rather astounding. And this is an article from the New York Times. North Korea rails against new sanctions. Whether they will work is unclear. The Trump administration has hailed the latest New York United Nations sanctions against nuclear-armed North Korea as the most severe yet, and the North's fury over the penalties suggested they did in fact carry some sting. The interesting thing about this, that for whatever reason is not in this article, is the fact that it was a 15-0 vote for sanctions against North Korea, which in my mind I find absolutely rather amazing for this one particular very important reason. China and Russia went along with the U.S. in voting for those sanctions. Rather stunning. In a staccato of outraged reactions on Monday to the sanctions imposed over the weekend, North Korea threatened retaliation against the United States, quote, thousands of times over. They vowed to never give up its nuclear arsenal and called the penalties a panicky response by an American bully. We're the bully. But it is unclear at best, experts on sanctions say, whether the measures will hinder North Korea's nuclear militarization or even crimp its economy. The sanctions are aimed at pressuring North Korea into negotiating with the goal of renouncing the nuclear weapons, but Kim Jong-un in the North, the leader, has repeatedly said that the country's nuclear capabilities are crucial to its self-defense. Then the rhetoric ratcheted up. And it was done essentially on both sides, pretty much back and forth. Here's a cut from Donald Trump and his new phrase, fire and fury, like the world has never seen.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. He has been very threatening. Beyond a normal statement. And as I said, they will be met with fire, fury, and frankly power, the likes of which this world has never seen before. Thank you.
Then, of course, after that, that happened to be met with some other rhetoric as well. North Korea, then, this is from Reuters. North Korea says it is seriously considering a plan to strike Guam. Now, this is from KCNA. Guam. Now, why Guam? This is from Reuters in Seoul. North Korea said on Wednesday, obviously today, it is carefully examining plans for a missile strike on the U.S. Pacific territory of Guam, just hours after U.S. President Donald Trump told the North that any threat to the United States would be met with fire and fury. North Korea has made no secret of plans to develop a nuclear-tipped missile able to strike the United States and has ignored international calls to halt its nuclear and missile programs. Now, stop. There was, in fact, news that came out today, an updated intelligence response, indicating that North Korea does, in fact, now have the ability to tip a missile and send it on its way. Perhaps to the West Coast, most definitely to South Korea, probably to Japan, and now if they're threatening Guam, that's certainly within that circle, that sphere as well. These are tempestuous times, and obviously there are two sides to this. There are a lot of people that say we need to make a clear and obvious statement, and perhaps we should consider a first strike. It's not that easy, and it's not that obvious. The moment you make a first strike, you're going to see lots of people on the northern border of South Korea, the southern border of North Korea. You're going to see hundreds of thousands of tons, literally tons, of artillery fall from the north to the south. Also in immediate jeopardy would be Seoul. Also in immediate jeopardy, if you do the math, if you stand back and let's say for whatever reason, there is an exchange between the United States and North Korea, and I cannot feature that it would be any other two actors in that sphere, in the Korean Peninsula. No matter the outcome, you're going to have some very serious issues. But I'll tell you what, let's put that on hold for a moment, if we can, because I told you that we have a very special guest who's going to be calling in, and he has, in fact, done so. And, folks, I'd like to say this, that tonight, in the Saloon, we have the distinct honor of speaking to thriller author Terrence McCauley, and he is live and direct from New York City. As I said before, New York City. Terrence is an award-winning writer of crime fiction and thrillers. The third novel in his university series, A Conspiracy of Ravens, is going to be published by Polis Books in September of this year, just next month, and is available, by the way, for pre-order right now if you dash over to Amazon.com. Now, he's got other novels in the series. One of them is Sympathy for the Devil. Another one is A Murder of Crows, and they were also published by Polis Books, and they feature a very curious character, a very interesting character of his. Terrence has also written two award-winning novels set in 1930s New York City. One is called Prohibition, the other one is called Slow Burn. Now, In 2016, just last year, Down and Out Books also published Terence's World War I novella, and this is what I mentioned in my blog last week. This novella is called The Devil Dogs of Bellawood, and you have to know that if you go and purchase that novella, proceeds from those sales go directly to benefit the Semper Fi Fund. I think that's a rather stunning and a very gracious stance from an author. Now, Terence had a short story, El Cambalanche, and has been nominated for Best Short Story in the ITW's annual Thriller Awards. He's also had short stories featured in Thuglit, another Spine Tingler magazine, Shotgun Honey, Big Pulp, and other publications. He's a member of the New York City chapter of the Mystery Writers of America, which is a big deal. The Mystery Writers of America have some really powerful authors in it. The International Thriller Writers and the International Crime Writers Association. In 2008, Terence won the True TV Search for the Next Great Crime Writer. And in 2014, he won 3 New Pulp Awards for Best Short Story, Best Novel, and Best Author. Now, Terence is an avid reader. He's a lover of classic movies, and he enjoys traveling. He's a really big soccer fan. He supports the Liverpool FC. That's the football club, for those of you not knowing that, in the English Premier League, and NYCFC as Major League Soccer. He's a proud native of the Bronx, New York, and he's currently writing his next new work of fiction. Folks, I'd like to really welcome, direct and live from New York City, Terence McCauley to the Saloon. Welcome, sir.
Hi, sir. How are you?
I happen to be really good. I have to say, number one, thank you for staying up so damn late, because this is... Look, folks, here's what a lot of radio things do, is they'll call folks during the day, and they'll set up, and it gets recorded, and then it gets played, and then if people don't like it, then they can take it and edit it, cut it up and whatnot. I really enjoy speaking to people live because you get a good, honest reaction from folks when they're live. Now, it's about 8:20 over on the left coast where I am, and that means it's 11:20 over on the right coast where you are. So that's why I say, sir, I really appreciate the point that, hey, you're calling it damn near 11:30, okay? Somebody's got to go to sleep pretty soon around here. I know it's not going to be me. So anyway, I got to say thank you for your time and welcome to the Saloon.
And thank you for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here and to be able to talk to you and your listeners.
I had let's put it bluntly, I told you about the FCC. The FCC doesn't monitor us in any way, and so I had an arseload of questions for you. And we're gonna get into your book, and we're gonna get into your soon-to-be-released novel, A Conspiracy of Ravens, which obviously I'd like to talk about. But first, I'd like to find out a little about you, say where you were born, where you were raised, that kind of thing, so we get a little bit of a taste and a feature of Terence McCauley.
Sure. It's the same place where I get my French accent from. I was born and raised in the Bronx, New York,
right?
Which is an area that's about, let's say, it's in where Yankee Stadium is. Yankee Stadium's on 161st Street.
Okay.
I was born and raised about 40 blocks north of there, and I spent the first 27 years of my life there. I was born in Union Hospital, lived on the Grand Concourse across the street from Polk Cottage. If you can Google it, you'll see where it is in a New York City park on the Grand Concourse. And then wound up going to school on the Grand Concourse up on 200th Street. So I've been a native of the Bronx for a good portion of my life. Went to high school at Fordham Prep and also graduated from Fordham University, all on the same campus. So I had the luxury of being able to walk to school my entire life. At Fordham University, I originally went there to become what I thought was going to be an FBI profiler. That was the big thing back then in the mid-'90s. And then I ultimately changed my major to political science, and I graduated in 1996 with a BA in poli-sci, and I've been working in government ever since.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Fordham University, didn't Vince Lombardi, of all people, graduate from Fordham?
Yes, Vince Lombardi graduated from Fordham. The Dulles family, who also wound up being involved with the CIA, they also, one of their brothers was also at Fordham as a Jesuit as well. So it has quite a varied history. Denzel Washington also went there too.
Ooh.
So one of our, let's see, who else? Vin Scully also went to Fordham University. There were quite a few people.
What were some of your earliest interests in school? I mean, was it like athletics, history, photography, any of that kind of stuff in particular? I'm going somewhere with this.
Sure, yeah. I mean, for me, and this is a tragic story, I wound up becoming a political junkie at the age of 10. It was right around, it was 84, and it was when the conventions were starting. And it was Mondale versus Reagan, as you probably remember.
Sure.
And here in the New York area, the newspapers ran a cartooned version of what the floor would look like at each convention. And I wanted to be an illustrator at the time, at the ripe old age of 10, and the illustrations made me interested in what was going on. And I surprised my parents. My parents weren't very political at all, but I was a little geek sitting there when they used to show actual news on live television back then, and checking who was sitting where, were they calling when the floor vote was coming, and for both Republican and Democratic conventions. And that was really my big, my early entree into politics, and I followed it, both parties, like some people follow baseball, and with that same kind of zeal. I also enjoy sports and everything, but with politics, it's always been a certain special love of mine. So I also happen to love history, so I got into, and I enjoy political history and political theory, and so that fed my interest also in some of the early movies from the 1940s and 50s and 30s even, and that I have till to this day.
Okay, damn it, I have to say, I did not see that coming at all. I didn't know that, for God's sake, I'm a political animal, too. It took me a long time. It was basically Ronald Reagan. Before that, in college, I was a leftist of the first order. Man, I was a registered Democrat, etc. Had hair down to the middle of my back, a beard even longer than I have now. So I didn't see that coming, but in high school, etc. Now, obviously, you're an author. That's the bottom line on this. You're a thriller author. Was there anything in high school or elementary school that kind of, you were involved in politics, you were interested in politics, but there was there a little bit of a spark early that said, hey, maybe I want to write?
Right. Well, I come from a long line of storytellers. Most of my family was in religion at one point or another. I had two uncles who were Catholic priests in the New York Archdiocese, an aunt who was a nun, and most of my cousins were either nuns or priests. So around the holidays, they would always have incredibly interesting stories to tell. My uncle, Jimmy Gorman, Father Jimmy, Monsignor Jimmy, was a chaplain up at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility back when they had a lot of celebrities up there. The Long Island Lolita was up there. The woman who killed the diet doctor was up there while he was the chaplain there. So, and my Uncle Joe, his brother, was a priest in several Bronx parishes, so they always had really great stories to tell about the parishioners. You got to see religion from a very different angle. It was never as, I don't want to say sacred, but it was a little bit more accessible to me than it was to other people. So I got to see the real human side of it rather than just what they tell you in Sunday school or in Catholic school in my case. So I got a chance to understand how stories are developed and a sense of humor and a sense of reality from the kinds of stories that I heard from them.
Okay, so that's your background. That's essentially your foundation upon which you built. We got 5 more minutes before the bottom of the hour break, and obviously we're going to continue after that. Folks, if you just tuned in, we are speaking to thriller author Terrence McCauley, who's written at least 8 books, has a new one coming out next month. And you... from my understanding, you really weren't into reading that much at an earlier age, say in high school very much, were you?
No, I wasn't. I didn't like to read at all. I wanted to be an illustrator, and my talent for drawing pretty much peaked at 15, and I realized I wasn't getting any better. And I still enjoyed telling a story, and I figured, well, I've always liked writing, so I'll give that a shot. But the problem is my writing wasn't very good because I never had enough of tolerance to sit and actually read something. So I would read, of course, for school, and I did pretty well in any of the reading classes, but I didn't enjoy it. And on summer break, I was playing Atari or watching movies, believe it or not, on VCR. I didn't really enjoy reading a book. I think the first one that I really read on my own was James Clavell's Taipan. And talk about starting in at the deep end of the pool. Some kids or people wind up reading a little dime novel. I wound up reading an 800-page epic, and it really hooked me into believing that I could write this kind of stuff. And it made me fall in love with storytelling.
It's like, okay, my first major book, let's start out with something really dense, like Clavell, okay? Oh, hey, better yet, how about the Gulag Archipelago? That's really a good book to start with. What the hell? Okay, so you started reading that, and you went right to the heavy stuff.
Yes, I did.
Around that time now, did you have any favorite early authors that may have informed some of your later writing?
Right. At that point, when I fell in love with Clavell, I wound up wanting to read something else, and I had the good fortune of having an independent bookstore here in the Bronx where I went back and said I loved Clavell, and he said, the person who worked there said, let's dial it back a little bit and give you something that's a little bit more fun that you could relate to. And he gave me Cathedral by Nelson DeMille, which is it's a really good book that holds up to this day about the IRA takes St. Patrick's Cathedral hostage during the St. Patrick's Day parade. And it is nonstop action. It's a fantastic book. And that taught me not just that I wanted to write, but the kind of stuff I wanted to write. I never wanted to be an MFA person who just writes high fiction. I wanted to write something that was good and that people would enjoy reading. So I continued to dabble in it from that point on. In college, I took some creative writing classes. My stuff was well received, and I continued on after I graduated.
Okay, so the nice thing about that is it appears as though you got some props along the way. Now, the next question I have, and let's see, we got about 2 more minutes to the break, is you've just not stuck to one genre, so to speak. I mean, you've branched now, and it looks like you're focusing, at least for a time, on your thriller writers. But I mean, you've got sort of a wide genre. What genres did you read in your early life when you just found books and you went for the dense stuff right off the bat?
Right. One of my heroes is Richard Matheson, who is a writer who's written pretty much in every genre there was, and I wanted to model my career, any career that I had in writing, after his. He went from writing I Am Legend all the way up to writing the fanciful What Dreams May Come. He wrote Westerns. He wrote a little bit in every genre, and I always admired him for that.
That's almost like Elmore Leonard. People don't realize that he wasn't just sort of a crime author, man. He started originally in Westerns.
Yes.
Which, man, I didn't associate Elmore Leonard with Westerns until I went back and started reading his earlier stuff, and I thought, holy crap, okay, I get it. Folks, we're going to take a break, be about 2 minutes or so, and we're going to be back. We are speaking to Terrence McCauley. He is calling us live from New York City. It's just a blessing to have you on tonight. So tell you what, folks, don't go away, and we're going to have a break and then be right back.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Breaking news. According to the latest report coming out of SHR Media, a merchandise store to support both the Reaver of Common Sense and SHR Media, has just been unleashed to the general public. Be forewarned that this site can be contagious and numerous items can be purchased to support the best news programming. Go to Reaver.one website and click on the store link to check out the merchandise.
Hello, I'm Matt, a student at Hillsdale College. Here is Hillsdale President Larry Arnn on the continuing relevance of the Constitution.
Many argue today that the Constitution is outdated because it addresses problems peculiar to the 18th century. Some parts of the Constitution do read rather quaintly. Consider the injunction against titles of nobility in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. But is that so outdated? The purpose of the injunction is to prevent the government granting special privileges to some for partisan reasons. This strikes at the heart of the rule of law. The crony capitalism so common today is a place where the government bestows favors and tax dollars on some businesses to give them a leg up over others. This is exactly the kind of thing the Constitution was meant to prohibit. The Constitution is not so outdated after all.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.com.
Times are dark. The people misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation in confusion needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, High Plains Talk Radio, Live Rebooting Liberty, and YouTube for a unique brand of commentary on the unpleasant blind guy. Because truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians.
You got a business. You didn't build that.
A team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying Catholic, stupid.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on shrmedia.com.
Beware, the Jersey Takeover is here. Every Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can catch the Reaver of Common Sense show, hosted by Jersey Joe, right here on shrmedia.com and highplainsdailynews.com. Only Jersey can deliver hell like no one else, so consider this your fair warning.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
In a world where insanity reigns supreme and safety pin manufacturers are running out of metal for the diapers of the leftists, it's comforting to know an ancient, fat, long-haired, bearded reprobate has your mind in mind. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, broadcasting behind enemy lines in occupied California. And despite every attempt by the SHR Media Network to revoke his shameless contract, we return to the bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon.
Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, thanks for coming back. We've been speaking to thriller author Terrence McCauley, who is on the phone. And Terrence, again, I got to say thank you for calling in as late at the night as you have.
That's fine.
I've personally done everything from having been at KFBK before Rush Limbaugh in radio to being a nuclear power plant security guard, tow truck driver, photography stringer for the Sacramento Bee, a reporter, photo editor, news editor, blah, 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 blah. I've done an arseload of things. What are some of the things that you've done along the way to get you to where you are now?
I volunteered in college. I wound up being an intern for the New York State Republican Party, where I got a chance to see politics after an election and got to see exactly how government functions, and that made me fall in love with it even more, believe it or not. And then after that, I was fortunate enough to get a job with the Empire State Development Corporation, which is the economic development agency for New York State. They basically try to sell New York State to companies that are already here and that are trying to expand, whether they're here already or they're trying to come from other places. And I was still working there during that horrible day during the attack of 9/11. And I was part of the recovery effort where we tried to keep the businesses that were already in Lower Manhattan active and also tried to attract more businesses to Lower Manhattan. And so it was a very tense time, and it was I was honored to be part of that effort.
Everyone remembers where they were on 9/11, so I have to ask you, since you're a New York native, where were you, sir?
I was in a corner office on at 633 3rd Avenue. Right when it wasn't my office. I had heard that a plane had flown into the towers, and then a second plane had flown in, and the corner office where my friend he wasn't in the office at the time, had a perfect dead-on view of both towers. And I'll never forget seeing I was standing there by myself, and I watched the antenna pitch forward just a little bit and then crumble, and I thought the antenna had fallen off. And it wasn't until I heard the news reports from a neighboring office that the entire building had collapsed. And I grew up watching, with those buildings practically. They were finished in '77. I was around, I was 3 years old, and I remember when they were finished, and it was impossible to try to comprehend what had just happened. And then in the days and weeks that followed, after what you see on television, the smoke and the smell throughout the city is something that no documentary ever can cover, and very few articles even covered it. And the other thing is, too, about how the city did really come together. New Yorkers are known for being brusque. They're known for being rude. Yeah. They're known for always being in a hurry. But for several weeks after that, it really did feel like what it is, which is a small island right near the edge of the Atlantic. And we all did come together for a little bit. It didn't last long, but it was memorable while it lasted, and it was a horrible time that I'll never forget, and I'll never forget the sights and sounds that I heard during that period.
You bring up an aspect that very few people think about, but you had to go back and relive it day by day by day, and that's this. When I've gone to certain crime scenes, there are certain smells associated with them. You get to leave. Right. When you're in New York City and when you're living there and when you're working there, I should imagine that was the slap in your face every day for a long time while you were there.
Sure, it was. I mean, anytime I would go near Canal Street, which you look on a map of Manhattan, you'll see it. For a good year after that, there was a constant thin layer of dust on everything, on the cars, on everything, and it smelled like burnt electricity and like burnt wire and some other unpleasant smells that as a professional I'm sure you can relate to, that were all mixed in together with all of the other smells that you have in New York. And it was especially in that part of the city. And my father used to work down there. He had since passed by the time the attacks happened, but he used to work right on 100 Church Street, so I used to go down to his office during the holiday season as a little kid, and I had a great affinity for that area. And to see it desecrated like that, it was really tough for me, not only as a New Yorker, but as someone who had some fond memories of that area.
Desecrated. That's an interesting term, but I would submit that it's completely applicable. You already answered a bit of the next question that I was going to. What I customarily like to ask people is, there are certain things in life that are what I term pivotal moments, when you're moving in one direction in life and then an event just seemed to change everything. For example, there were two huge pivotal moments for me. One of them is how I got into law enforcement, and the second one is a critical incident in a shooting that I got into. You obviously just delineated to me one critical, I would guess a critical, pivotal moment in your life. Were there any others that occurred where you're going in one direction and all of a sudden this occurs and it's a game changer?
Yeah, for me it was when I was in I was in government for about 5 or 6 years, and I was starting to become disillusioned with it. And I talked to my father, who was my best friend, and he's long since passed. And he said, "Look, you've got a gift for writing, and you better do something with it. You better explore it to the best of its ability." And so I took writing classes. I took a lot of workshopping classes, and I honed my gift. I knew how to tell a story, but I did not know if I knew how to tell it in a convincing manner. So I spent a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort in creating a story that I thought people would be interested in. And at the end of it, I told my father the kind of story I wanted to write, which was an epic mob war story. And it took me 4 pages to write it out, and I gave it to him. My father was an avid reader, and believe it or not, I wasn't as a kid, but he was. The bookshelves filled with books. He loved Elmore Leonard and books like that. And since I don't have to watch my language, I will tell you, I gave him the outline. He read it, and I sat there waiting for him to tell me what he thought of it. When he was done, I said, "What do you think of it?" And he said, "It's as long as a whore's dream and just as pointless."
Okay, I should probably stop laughing now. But
and he was right.
But the other thing is that's a game changer because you found some of your inspiration in your father, and I find that a really stellar kind of thing. So then that's pretty much a tipping point when you decided, okay, this author thing, I'm going to go for it.
Right, and he encouraged me too. I mean, he said, "Look, you've got a good idea, but tone it down a little bit. I don't care about the other families. I don't care about the mega mob war. It's been done before. It's been done better." He said, "Focus on one guy. Focus on somebody that in a mob, let's say, who they don't always talk about. They always talk about the mob boss, but they rarely ever talk about the hitman." And so that's what I focused on, and that's where the book Prohibition came from, the one that won the prize in 2008.
Folks, we're talking to thriller author Terrence McCauley, and again, I have to say thank you ever so kindly for being on as late as it is. Now, right now, you seem to be really rolling with your series involving your protagonist named James Hicks, and he turns out to be the leader of a sort of a rather shadowy kind of New York intelligence operation called The University. Now, you've already had 2 prior books published in this series. One was Sympathy for the Devil, and one was A Murder of Crows. So if you can you tell us a little bit about James Hicks? And maybe this, is there any of Terrence McCauley in there?
Well, in the character James Hicks, there is a little bit of me in him in that he has a bit of a dry sense of humor, and B, he smokes cigars like I do. So I had to, I did have to include that little personal touch there. But in terms of writing about the university itself, people have asked me, why did you go out and create your own kind of clandestine group when you just could have used a CIA or an FBI agent or a bureau of one of those more established groups? I didn't want to do that because whenever you delve into something like that, you have to do an awful lot of research. Otherwise, people are going to pop up out of nowhere and pick it apart. Yep. As a former law enforcement person, I'm sure you've done the same thing. When you've read something or you've seen something on a cop show, and you say that doesn't happen, that's ridiculous. I didn't want to come under the same scrutiny, and I didn't want to waste time doing the research into the way the CIA works or the way the NSA works, when all I wanted to do was tell a really kick-ass, action-packed story. So I decided the one way around that is to create my own believable counterintelligence group and have it called The University. And as someone who's fallen victim as a reader to books that were weighed down with a lot of backstory, I didn't want to write a book like that. I wanted to hint at what the university was while showing you exactly what they do. And along the way, you find out a little bit as we go along through Sympathy for the Devil, and then you find out a little bit more about it as you go through A Murder of Crows, and you find an awful lot more about it in the third book. But it's an important thing to tell the reader about, but I don't want to be laid down like Dan Brown was with, if you read his books. I mean, there are whole 5 or 6 pages full of backstory. I didn't want to do that.
Funny thing is that you should mention Dan Brown. He had a wife that was in law enforcement. I happened to meet him in Folsom, California. And a very interesting guy. He comes from a military B-52 Navigator background, and from Mather Air Force Base, was just a hop, skip, and a jump from where we are right now. Now, your current focus is on the university. I'm guessing that you write what you want to read, and you're interested currently in this intelligence aspect. Would that be correct?
That would be correct. What I try to do is meld modern-day technology that we all use and try to meld it in with this covert world of counterintelligence that the university operates in. I wanted to write something that people could relate to, and I decided the best way to do that was to use the cell phone. Hicks doesn't have a whole secret... he doesn't have a whole group of people working for him behind the scenes. There isn't a single compound like they have at MI6 and the James Bond movies.
Right.
It's a mobile-based group, and everything is run off a desktop computer and also his tablet and his smartphone. And way back when I wrote this a couple of years ago, biometrics was just coming to the fore, and people read it and they said, that's ridiculous, using his thumbprint to start his phone.
Yeah.
That's absurd. Now it's commonplace. So what I did was I saw what was coming, or I knew what technology was happening in other countries, and I used it in my books because I knew it wasn't so far-fetched that people wouldn't be able to relate to it. But I wanted them to be interested enough to say, oh, yeah, that's kind of cool. I didn't think of it being that way.
I got to tell you, that's a really, really engaging concept. Folks, if you are just tuning in, we're speaking to thriller author Terrence McCauley, who, by the way, has got a new book coming out next month, September, called A Conspiracy of Ravens. So what can you tell us about that book, Terrence?
Well, that book is the third in the series of the James Hicks books. If you haven't read the other two, you don't have to. I do try to summarize what happens in the books previous within the first couple of chapters of the current book. So like A Murder of Crows, I try to summarize a little bit of what happened in Sympathy for the Devil. And in this one, it's a culmination of what's happened in the first 2 books. I won't say that it's a trilogy because it's not, but I definitely tie a lot of loose ends together, and I explain the actions of what have happened in the first 2 novels. And I also delve more into the character of James Hicks. As I said earlier, I don't tell you exactly what the university is in the first 2 novels. In this one, you really find out a lot more about it. You also find out a lot more about this mysterious guy you've been reading about, James Hicks. You find out a little bit more about his humanity. You find out how he deals with loss. You find out how he deals with challenges. And it was a lot of fun to write because I finally got to know this character as well as I wanted to, as well as I've known some of the other characters I've written about in other genres. So this was a lot of fun to write, and I think based on the preliminary feedback I've gotten, people really love this book.
So as you write, you find more about. See, that's what I find amazing. A lot of authors are plotted, outlined, etc. You're making some discoveries about your character along the way. Now, you write at a computer on your porch, and you like it quiet. So, do you write with Marlowe or without Marlowe?
That all depends on Marlowe. For everybody who's listening, Marlowe's my beautiful little black cat. She was a feral cat that lived in a barn, and for some reason she wound up coming to our family, and she's been tame ever since, and she's lovely. And every once in a while, she loves to crawl up there while I'm writing, usually in the middle of a really great scene, and interrupted by demanding to get hugged or petted or something like that. So, and then she sees a bird and she forgets all about me.
Bird gone. Some authors have a really strict pattern when they write. In other words, some write only at night, some only in the morning during specific hours of the day. Do you find you're a really regimented writer, or are you sort of like catch as catch can?
I write every day, at least if I'm not doing actual writing, I will do it on, I'll do some kind of research or whatever. On the way to work, I have my iPhone has the Notes app. I tap away on that. It saves to the cloud. On my way home from work, I frequently write, and I can get in about 500 to 1,000 words a day that way. And on the weekends, my wife, unfortunately, isn't a football widow. She's a writer widow. She allows me to be out on the porch. I'm not bothering her with bad television about UFOs or the JFK conspiracy. I'm out on the porch instead, and I'm writing my novels, and I clear a lot of pages that way as well. So I'm regimented in the fact that every day I try to do at least research or some kind of writing. But I'll write. Thank God for them. They're my wife and mother-in-law. They keep reminding me on the weekends that I have to do things like eat and go to the bathroom and get up every once in a while. Otherwise, I'd be there for 10 hours at a time without a break.
What is your thought on this? Is it all about the writing, or is it all about the editing?
It's all about the. That's a very good question. For me, it's all about the writing, because without the writing, I can't edit anything. And some people are. And each writer is different. Some outline strictly. Some are people who don't outline at all. I always have an idea in my head about what I'm going to write, but for me, I try to get as much down on paper, and then while I'm editing, new things come in. But every writer, no matter what stage they are, whether they're self-published or they're a New York Times bestseller, needs to have a professional proofreader take a look at their stuff. That's something that I recommend to everybody, because you're never going to catch everything that you think you will.
Terrence, why are there so many crappy movies these days?
I think it's because people are investing now in movies, and they are looking for something that they believe is bankable. So that's why you're seeing a lot of remakes. There's also property law involved, where if they don't develop a property within a certain amount of time, they lose the rights to it. I think that Hollywood was getting really good for a long time at telling some original stories. One example was the Planet of the Apes movies that came out over the last few years. The first two were absolutely fantastic. I was expecting nothing, and I was blown away by both of them. And without giving away any spoilers, you can just look at the trailers of the third one. I have seen the third one, and they revert back to some tired old Hollywood tropes of the crazy colonel, the mad military person, just like Avatar did. And I was disappointed, because I was expecting them to be a little bit more original than that. And I think the movies that do the best are the ones that are most original these days.
Cliché, cliché, cliché. And so you answered for me, and I'll answer for you. Story. What they're missing is story. People want to read a story. People want to see a story. And not just
That's correct.
Not just bullshit. They want to see a story with characters into whom they can become invested. They want to be invested in characters. Another question for you.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's just to quickly add, that's borne out by the popularity of Game of Thrones. It's not just because of the nudity, and it's not just because of the dragons. It's because they're really well-told stories that have a lot of really good action, too. So that's why I think that's popular.
Game of Thrones, it's politics, and story and character. Okay, Terrence, got to ask you this. Rob Zombie, Ministry, or Nine Inch Nails?
Rob Zombie.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I would say Rob Zombie's. His Supercharger Heaven is fantastic. That's one of the things that I write to when I'm actually doing an action scene and I need it to really pop and I'm looking for inspiration. But I'll tell you, Nine Inch Nails is an interesting one. My favorite Johnny Cash song, believe it or not, is "Hurt." That was written by Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails.
Yep. And by the way, I'm curious. The last 3 or 4 albums from Johnny Cash, I think, were some of the best albums he ever made because of the producer.
I agree. I agree, yeah. And Trent Reznor said when he heard him do that version of Hurt, he said, that's not my song anymore. He says he owns that song now forever. And that's my, and it's funny, a lot of people, because of the first title of my first book, Sympathy for the Devil, they thought it was they thought that Hicks would be a Rolling Stones fan, or that I was a Rolling Stones fan. But I always have a theme song for every character that I write, and for James Hicks, it's Hurt by Johnny Cash, his version of that song.
Wow. Okay. I have to say, that's a hell of a lot of insight right there. Terrence, if you could meet anybody from history, who would you be inclined to want to meet?
Anybody in history, I'd probably say, based on the fact that I'm reading a lot about that part of the era now, I'd probably want to meet Dwight Eisenhower, because he was he's a very accomplished individual in practically everything he tried to do. He was an accomplished military person. He was an accomplished politician. He got to see the country from a lot of angles, from afar and from near. At this point in my life, he would probably be the person I'd want to meet.
On that juncture, can you imagine what the state of the planet would be right now if, for example, Dwight D. Eisenhower made the wrong choice? The responsibility that had to have weighted down his shoulders. Staggering. I find that absolutely staggering. Okay, yeah. You've got A Conspiracy of Ravens coming out next month, and we've got about 3 minutes left. So what's next for you in 2018 and beyond? After your book, A Conspiracy of Ravens, folks, you've got to read Terrence McCauley. You can go to Amazon.com, pick up his books. His books are wide and varied. So once your new book comes out, what's going to be new for you?
After this one, one thing I'm trying to do is get people to pay attention to the one that I have out now called, for the Semper Fi Fund, which you were kind enough to mention earlier, The Devil Dogs of Belle Isle Wood. It was a World War I novella that features Charlie Doherty, who I write about in Slow Burn, and it's his experiences as a Marine at the Battle of Belle Isle Wood, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with.
Yep.
It was the battle that pretty much cemented the modern reputation of the Marines as the fighting force that we know today. All money for that, whether it's print or downloading the ebook, goes directly to the Semper Fi Fund. I didn't get an advance for it. Publisher doesn't make any money off of it. Everything goes to that wonderful cause. And the reason why I bring up Charlie Doherty is because the next book I have for Polis is called The Fairfax Incident. It's set in 1933 New York, and to pique your interest, it tells you how the university begins.
Aha, okay, some nice insight. Outstanding.
Right, so that's what I did.
Okay, tell us now, if you can, Terrence McCauley, where can you be found? Where can you be read? Tell us about your website, any social media that you have if people want to find you.
Right. I'm everywhere. You can find me on Facebook as Terrence P. McCauley, McCauley, and Terrence is Terrence. Then on Twitter, I'm also there as T. McCauley _NYC, and I'm also on Instagram too as Terrence McCauley. And I'm also on Litsy, on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. All of my books, Sympathy for the Devil and Murder of Crows, are also featured as audiobooks from Amazon. And all of my books, whether they're digital or in print, are available in all formats. If you go to a library and you want my book, you can always ask the librarian to order it. It's readily available. Polis has great distribution. And I always welcome feedback. My website is www.terrencemccauley.com. And the best part of it is when I get emails from readers who give me creative criticism or praise is also always a nice thing to get as well.
Terrence, would you consider coming back to the Saloon when you've got another project going, or you've got another book out, or some new direction that you'd like to go? Because I'd like to have you back, quite frankly.
Oh God, I'd love to come back. I'll come back whenever whenever you'd like. And if you just want me to come back and talk about this topic in general, or about any kind of like a NSA style topics, sure, I'd love to come back anytime you want.
I'll tell you what. This is my offer to you. You can even come the hell back, and if you want to vent about like bad traffic or rude tech support, you can come back for that as well. I mean, we're open here at the Saloon, folks. We've been speaking to thriller author Terrence McCauley, live and direct from New York City, and I want to say most unequivocally that I thank you, sir, for taking the time to talk to us. It was both a pleasure and an honor simultaneously. Thank you ever so kindly.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Folks, first, Terrence, take care. You do well, and good night. Folks, we were talking to Terrence McCauley. He's got some great books out. You must read him. We're going to go to a break, and then we're going to delve back into, what do you think? Politics. Go read Terrence McCauley. Do it right now. Quick like a bunny.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Hey, it's Sean from the Sackheads Radio Show. Also one of the owners here at the SHR Media Network. Are you opinionated? Have you ever wanted to do your own show? Have you ever heard somebody like the Sackheads and go, yeah, I could probably do that better? Well, now's your chance. Send me a 5-minute clip at sackheadsradio@gmail.com, and maybe you can be part of the SHR broadcasting team. sackheadsradio@gmail.com.
Times are dark. The people are misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation looking for direction needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, Pundit Press Radio, and YouTube through the SHR Media page for a different kind of commentary on the unpleasant blind guy. Because the truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians,
You got a business. You didn't build that.
a team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying Catholic, stupid.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on SHRmedia.com.
The bloviating Zeppelin. He's big-footed enough radio shows to last a lifetime, courtesy of Sean, Clint, Ken, and Jersey Joe. Now it's time for him to waddle on his own 2 feet via the glorious SHR Media. Gird thy loins for the bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon. Coming soon to ossicles near you. Excelsior.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Folks, it's 9:05 on the left coast. It's after the witching hour on the right coast. Ooh, we just got through speaking to thriller author Terrence McCauley, who actually is a wide and varied author. We spoke to him. This was really, I have to say, I just sent him a tweet, and I said, thank you for taking your time. And I have to emphasize this. A lot of people will record this stuff, these various interviews, during the day when it's really convenient for everyone, myself included. And he deigned to come on tonight into the Saloon live, which means it was an arseload of late-night stuff for him to do. And not only did he speak to us for 10 or 15 minutes or a half hour, he was kind enough to speak to us for a full 45 minutes. And knowing BZ, you probably suspected, and you'd be absolutely right, that I had a lot more questions for him. So with that having been said, Terrence McCauley, you're welcome anytime back here in the Saloon. I had a great time, and I hope you did too. Speaking of great times, or perhaps not so much, there was a particular article today that I have to say irritated the living shite out of me. And it came from ABC News. Now, it wasn't irritating simply because of the source of the news itself, although that could be an issue in and of itself. It was about this particular headline, and it goes like this, and I think you'll understand very shortly. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell vents about Trump's excessive expectations regarding legislation. Because what was old BZ's first thought, do you think? Well, let's listen to Mitch kvetch about poor Mitchie.
Saying we've been there, haven't done anything, which I find extremely irritating. And I'm going to tell you why.
Because, Mitch, you haven't done anything.
Congress goes on for 2 years. And part of the reason I think that the storyline is that we haven't done much is because
you haven't.
In part, the president and others have set these...
Stop. Bullshit alert. Oh, it's the president's fault, is it? Who's insisted that you do as many things as possible, that you actually be a conservative. Who were the obstructionists, Mitch? Who were the obstructionists? Oh, it's all President Trump's fault. The guy with the dead orange cat on his head, right? It's not McCain's fault. It's not Lindsey Graham's fault. It's not Mitch McConnell's fault.
These early timelines about things need to be done by a certain point. Now, our new president had, of course, not been in this line of work before, and I think had excessive expectations about how quickly things happen.
Meaning, let me translate for you, all right? Because this is right-wing rhino fucktard translation for you, and that's this. We're here, the customary GOP establishhacks, to make sure that our phony baloney jobs are sufficiently feather-bedded so that we don't enable you because you're not one of us. Stop. That's the primary reason that the GOP establishhacks have thrown up every blockade that they possibly can because Trump is not one of them. Oh, and that's right. He also comes from the business background. What do we know about business? Oh, yes, there are deadlines and expectations. And if you don't meet a deadline or satisfy an expectation, what happens? What do you lose? Money. What happens when you lose money? It hurts. Let me translate over to the aisle, both sides of the aisle as well. And that's this. They don't give a fuck about your money because it's not their money. And if the expectations are not met, they still have a job. They still go to work. Year after year after year, no term limits. And no matter what happens when they leave, they couldn't give one shite about you because they've got their own.
In the democratic process. And so part of the reason I think people feel like we're underperforming is because
you are.
Too many kind of artificial deadlines.
Artificial deadlines. Artificial deadlines. So that's it. They're not getting things done because of artificial deadlines.
Unrelated to the reality of the complexity of legislating.
The complexity of legislating. Building up a skyscraper. That's not complex, is it? Meeting goals all around. Making and creating a multi-billion-dollar industry. That's not complex, is it?
May not have been fully understood. And of course, our political adversaries would be love to say that anytime. So what I'm asking of you is to judge this Congress when it finishes. How much have we done?
Wait, maybe you might want to rephrase that, Mitch. How much has Trump done?
To make America competitive again and to grow again, and that's part of America.
Stop, Mitch. You had the ability to do that. You had control for a time, the Senate, the Congress. Now you've got the presidency. You had 8 years, Mitch, in order to craft a repeal and institute a new healthcare system. You failed to do it. That is a failure, Mitch McConnell. That is a failure on every level, and it's a failure of imagination.
Making America great again, which is what the president talks about so much. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I know everybody's saying...
Am I the only one that after listening to that and reading that article, number one, I had to listen to the whole thing because I was doing the exact same thing, only at a much greater decibel level when I first heard that. So what McConnell is saying is, number one, it's Trump's fault. Number two, it's not our fault. Number three, it can never be our fault because of these foul expectations and deadlines. Arbitrary, out of someone's arsehole. Arbitrary deadlines that have to be met that are so unfair in the first place, even though you've had 8 years to figure this shite out, Mitch. And you haven't done it. Either Sunday or Monday, I'm going to have a lengthy post on bloviatingzeppelin.net where I'm going to show you quite illustratively, okay, that's tough to say, about how almost at every juncture the GOP has managed to undermine Donald Trump. The establishhacks have. There are some that are attempting to enable and aid him. Because no matter what your philosophy, even Mitch McConnell, they're losing sight of the big picture. You know where I stand philosophically. I was speaking to Terrence McConnell earlier today in some tweets, in some messages to him. And I said, I'm politically somewhere between Attila the Hun and Vlad the Impaler, although I've mellowed just a bit now in my dotage. Just a bit, but not much. Trump went through 16 candidates. He wasn't my guy. He's my guy now. One of his first acts was to install Neil Gorsuch. This is my philosophy, and again, if I sound like a broken record, so fucking what? We're going to have another opening in SCOTUS. Probably this year sometime or early next year. That's 2. Before 2020, in 3 more years, I fervently believe we're going to get 3. There's going to be a 3rd opportunity to install someone in SCOTUS. But we have to keep the Senate. And how do you keep the Senate? You satisfy the conservatives. Now I have to ask you, just like every election, are you not... You find yourself incredibly conflicted. You're conflicted. I'm conflicted. Every damn election I'm conflicted. God, do I pull the damn handle? Mostly I do. Sometimes I don't. But, Mitch McConnell, you fucktard, I have to say this. You better start producing. A word to the Republicans. you'd better start producing. This new generation of conservatives, I submit, is a little bit different from the last. Now, I'm in my 7th decade. I make no qualms about that whatsoever. So I'm basically, I have to tell you that I come from the land of I don't give a fuck. Because I've primarily got mine. And I have a great house a number of miles away, so if Sacramento turns into a big radioactive hole one afternoon, I've got what I need 90 miles plus away. I'm starting to think I'm not the only one who feels this way on the conservative side. So here's a warning to Mitchie and all the people like him, like John McCain and Lindsey Graham et al. You'd best get your ducks in a row. The BSTL, what I call the bullshit tolerance level of conservatives, is dwindling by the day and by the month. And when you, Mitch McConnell, and people of your ilk come out and publicly essentially say, Trump, are you going to tell me that my expectations are too high? Trump's expectations to actually get work done are too high? Stop it. Who's in control of Congress? Oh, that's right, the GOP. Who's in control of the Senate? Oh, that's right, it's the GOP. Who sits in the White House? A Republican. We had that control in 1928. We also had that control for only the second time in 2003 to 2006 under George Bush. But then, as now, what the hell did the GOP do with that power? They pissed it away, in my opinion. And John McCain and his little gang of 8, which he wants to reassemble again, by the way, are responsible for the giveaways. And as I've said before numerous times, there's bipartisanship and there's compromise, yes? But according to the leftists, who has to be bipartisan? The GOP. Who has to compromise? The GOP. Who can rally? Who knows how to wield power? Not the GOP. This is a warning to Mitch McConnell, who's attempting to set up his useless excuses already. That's this. Myself, other people like us, actual conservatives, people who are not establishment hacks like you, whose life revolves around, did I get a new car? What does my office look like? Did I get better drapes than the guy next door? That's not what my life revolves around. And my guess is that's not what your life revolves around, or Terrence McCauley's, or anyone that's listening live, or anybody that's listening in chat and being in chat, or anybody that's listening to the podcast. And I apologize for not having been much in chat. I was busy running all sorts of buttons and whatnot. You have expectations. You have expectations because logically you have gone out of your way to vote and install people like Mitch McConnell into these positions expecting there to be an ROI, a return on investment. And in my estimation, Mitch McConnell is essentially saying, blow me. You have expectations of us? Screw your expectations. We're doing it at the time that we want, when we want. We're going to take vacations as we please. And if shite doesn't get done, there really are no consequences for us. Look at Hillary Clinton. Look at all the politicians in the past. Consequences? They say. Really? What consequences? I'm not seeing a whole lot. That might be, however, just changing in a bit. Now, did I just give you a teaser for next Thursday's show? Perhaps I did. We might quantify that as the Consequences edition of the Berserk Bobcat Saloon. The Thursday show, the Aftermath, I had the Dumpster Fire edition last week. Maybe next Thursday's the Consequences edition. We're going to talk about some things like that. By the way, next Thursday, I'm going to have a full hour with the Underground Professor, and we're going to talk about all things constitutional, because I told him last Thursday I would like to have, I had a ton of questions for him, and I would like to have continued with that. So come back. I'm sort of prepping my show for next Thursday, because we're going to talk exactly of that. In summary, Mitch McConnell, be careful. Be very, very careful. Maybe I could say it in my best Elmer Fudd voice. Be careful. Be very, very careful. Where you go and what you do and the results that you get because of rhetoric like this, you may not like it. And you may not like the results for the rest of the GOP. Hashtag just saying. Folks, did you know, let's see, I got about another 10 minutes. I might be able to do this. Did you know that there was a mayoral candidate in Minnesota who wants to disarm the police? And at first thought you would say, oh no, BZ, that can't be true. Oh, perish the thought. First, before I go there, I have to give you a little bit of a background in terms of the predicating event that was prompting mayoral candidate Raymond Daines' statement about disarming the Minneapolis Police Department. And first, this headline, which you may have heard before, this came from Fox News. Minnesota cop who fatally shot Australian woman was fast-tracked into the force. Stop. I've gotten emails and I've gotten Twitter messages and various other social media information, questions to me saying, hey, BZ, having been in law enforcement, are you ever going to weigh in on that shooting regarding the Australian woman who was killed in the city of Minneapolis? And my reply would be, yes, we're going to talk about that right now. The Minnesota police officer who fatally shot Justine Damond was put on an accelerated police cadet program that required only 7 months of training, a non-traditional route that aims to help those who have a college degree enter law enforcement. So with a degree, I guess that means that there are certain things that you don't have to learn in the academy. Huh. Does that make sense to you? Mohammed Noor, 31, shot Damond, 40, after she called 911 to report a sexual assault behind her home. When she approached the driver's side of the squad car, Mohammed Noor fired from the passenger side across his partner, killing the woman, Damond. The Minnesota Police Department, actually it's the Minneapolis Police Department, has been under fire since the July 15th shooting. Many have questioned Noor's experience and training after only graduating in 2015. However, former police chief, there's an operative word, note that, former police chief Janae Harteau, who resigned 2 weeks ago, stood by the training of good old Noor.
This afternoon, we know more about what happened when a police officer shot and killed a woman in southwest Minneapolis.
Friends say 40-year-old Justine Damond called 911 about a disturbance in the alley behind her home on Saturday night. One of the two responding officers shot and killed the Australian native. The officer who shot Damond is Mohammed Noor. He was sworn in 2015.
This all began around 11:30 Saturday night in southwest Minneapolis, just a few blocks from Lake Harriet. Damond's loved ones say that she called 911. Shortly after that, Noor shot her in an alley about a block from her home. Noor was sitting in the passenger seat of the police cruiser when he fatally shot Damond. Officer Matthew Harity was in the driver's seat. We have team coverage of what has become an international story. We want to begin with Susan Elizabeth Littlefield, who has an update on the investigation.
That's right, Frank. You know, in 2015, Mohammed Noor became an officer here at MPT. He actually made history. He was the first Somali American officer to start working here. But now there are many questions as he's on administrative leave. When Officer Noor and his partner responded to a late-night call, they had their weapons close by. Justine DeMond's loved ones say she placed the call for help, a possible assault in the alley. While she stood in the alley talking with the two officers in their cruiser, WCCO has learned Officer Noor reached over his partner who was in the driver's seat and shot and killed DeMond.
Very important point on that, which I will get back to.
There's a shock that is happening that a Somali police officer shot and killed a woman in Minneapolis.
Despite the name, Mohammed Noor has no direct relation to Officer Noor. He says the officer's job has been a sense of pride for the Somali community.
Okay, I think I'm just about done with that. It's time to move on. But did you notice that I talked about a female police chief? And I talked about, by the way, she's a lesbian chief. And now she's a Gone in 60 Seconds chief. And that tells me what I would say is one very, very important thing. An innocent Caucasoid Australian woman and a Somali Muslim magically appear to trump a lesbian chief of department politically. And you have to color me shocked over that one. So it's like, boom, gone. Hey, good to know. The hierarchy of politics in Minneapolis, what I told each and every patrol trainee of mine, everyone that came through. And it's true. History has proven this to me time and again. And I think Chief Harto learned that as well. If it is politically or fiscally expedient, you will be sacrificed. And there's truth there. You have to dig it out, though. Sort of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 big-ass chisel strikes at a time. She said, we have a very robust training and hiring process. This officer completed that training very well, just like every other officer. He was very suited to be on the street. No political correctness here or there. That would never occur in a job as critical as police officer, would it? I mean, you'd like to think so, that it wouldn't. But others believe the fast-track program could leave officers ill-prepared to handle real-world police scenarios. Wait. Are you trying to intimate to me that there is some kind of opposition theory? The cadet program is rigorous, no doubt, James Densley, a criminal justice associate professor of Metropolitan State University in St. Paul, told the Strib, the Star Tribune. But it's also an immersive paramilitary experience taught by practitioner faculty without advanced degrees, and I suspect it leaves students with a limited view of the profession. Okay, so, right, they're well-trained, but now we've got a professor that says they're not well-trained, and it's because of the ill-educated instructors themselves and inadequate staff. Okay, well, wait, which is it? And again, but wait, there's more. Read this. Well, I'm going to read it to you. Nate Grove, the head of the State Peace Officer Standards and Training Board, which controls police training and sets all the objectives, like Post here in California does, said the non-traditional routes are no less rigorous in Minnesota than the traditional ones. Really? The Peace Officer Licensing Examination includes 275 questions and takes about 2 or 3 hours to complete. Are you beginning to suss something to me? Because there's a suggestion here that I would say is this. That in lieu of full training, Noor instead took a paper test, which he was able to pass. Otherwise, why would you include the intimation that he was fast-tracked? Air quotes. And if Noor was fast-tracked by having passed only a paper test instead of a full training venue, well, guess what? You do, in fact, have a very serious slight, and that was committed in training. Perhaps now, a deadly slight. But I don't know this because the articles that I've read so far to date do not definitively state this. This much is true, and this is a quote. Damon's shooting death has been ruled a homicide by the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office. And with that, we're going to take a break. We're going to go to the final segment here because I've got much more to say about this, as you might expect.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Hey, it's Sean from the Sackheads radio show, also one of the owners here at the SHR Media Network. Are you opinionated? Have you ever wanted to do your own show? Have you ever heard somebody like the Sackheads and go, yeah, I could probably do that better? Well, now's your chance. Send me a 5-minute clip at sackheadsradio@gmail.com, and maybe you can be part of the SHR broadcasting team. sackheadsradio@gmail.com.
Times are dark. The people are misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation looking for direction needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, Pundit Press Radio, and YouTube through the SHR Media page for a different kind of commentary on the unpleasant blind guy. Because the truth is not always pleasant.
Hey, this is Mim from Freedom Fest, the world's largest gathering of free minds. Join your friends from SHR Media at the beautiful Paris Resort in Las Vegas, Nevada, July 19th through the 22nd.
By the way, stop. I got to do something about this. We have got to get together because we've got to get some new stuff in the break here. I know you've said it before. Trust me, tomorrow night, I'm going to be attempting to motivate you-know-who.
3 amazing days of liberty-oriented discussion, investment advice, and the Anthem Film Festival. It's our big 10th anniversary, featuring keynote speaker William Shatner, and Freedom Fest favorites, including Steve Forbes, Jim Rogers, Lee Edwards, David Boaz, Doug Casey, Dinesh D'Souza, John Stossel, Lisa Kennedy, Grover Norquist, Peter Schiff, and many more. Don't miss out. Register at freedomfest.com for $100 off the regular registration rate when you use the all-caps code SHR Media.
Featuring right thinking from a left brain and doing the job the American maggots won't. BZ is fundamentally changing America one diaper at a time. Just when safety pin manufacturers are running out of metal for the diapers of the leftists, where the speech is free, but the drinks are not. The bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon can be heard every Tuesday and Thursday night, commencing at 11 p.m. Eastern and 8 p.m. Pacific, where pushback is a requisite art form in and of itself. Let your ossicles be truly liberated when you listen to the bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon, only on SHR Media Network. No ferrets were harmed in the making of this ad.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, you are in fact listening to the bloviating Zeppelin on the SHR Media Network at shrmedia.com. You can also read my stuff at bloviatingzeppelin.net. I'm on Twitter at BZEP, BZEP. We were talking about the Minnesota cop who, July 15th, I believe, fatally shot an Australian woman by the name of Justine Damon under situations and circumstances that were questionable at best. And now we discover that in Minneapolis there is a mayoral candidate who is advocating the disarmament of the police. So what I was doing is I was in the process of going into the background and the information about what happened with regard to this. And we were talking about the officer involved. His name is Mohammed Noor. He's a Somalian. And And we were speaking about the incident itself and the training because, trust me, I'm going somewhere with this. What do we know about the situation? We know that the body cams were not activated at the time of that event, but actually that's well and truly an internal argument, an internal issue with regard to whatever policy the Minneapolis PD has emerged with regard to operation. Now, the dash cam itself was also off. The same thing holds for that with regard to policy. And that all falls under the internal policy and not law. I want to make that distinction. Now, the MPD, I went back and found the policy on this. MPD, the Minneapolis Police Department, does indicate that body cams should be activated if force is used, but there's a problem. As with policy like this, there is no standard blanket policy for body cams, which is an issue, but the use of force aspect of body cams is flawed in and of itself because, can a cop adequately, if ever consistently, predict when you're going to have to utilize force? Sometimes you can see it coming. That's very seldom the case. The priority should be safety and response rather than the activation of equipment, unless you have a different policy from that, which I may or may not have the time to get into. Okay, that is basically in and of itself, that's a massive issue with which, in my estimation, law enforcement throughout the nation has yet to sufficiently grapple. And I made a suggestion a long time ago that body cams in and of themselves were problematic, and even if they were perfect, there is no one silver bullet, so to speak. I hate to use that phrase, but there is no one perspective, one perfect godlike perspective into which to see a critical incident. It just doesn't, it doesn't exist. There's no yet one-size-fits-all policy for all of this regarding body cams and video equipment, dash cams, etc. That's much less the huge acquisition costs, the equipment costs, and the storage costs. And then this weird-ass thing comes out of the ChicagoTribune.com with this headline. Australian woman shot by cop did not have to die, Minneapolis police chief says. The fatal shooting of an Australian woman by Minneapolis police officer responding to a 911 call should not have happened, Police Chief Jane Harteau said, adding that the officer's actions go against who we are in the department. And again, note she lost her job. In her first public remarks since the death of Justine Damon, a 40-year-old life coach and bride-to-be, Harteau on Thursday, a couple of weeks ago, defended Officer Mohammed Noor's training, but criticized his actions. Wait. Okay, he was well-trained, but he screwed up. So, Chief Harteau, what are you trying to say here? What are you trying to justify? Are you trying to justify his training? Or are you trying to justify his actions? Because it's training or the lack thereof that has a great deal to do with the appropriate reactions in the field. And like I said, oh yeah, she's a former chief of police.
It's breaking news from WCCO.
Good evening. We do begin with breaking news. The Minneapolis police chief has just resigned in the wake of a police shooting.
Janae Harteau became the city's first female and openly gay chief nearly 5 years ago, but her leadership has come under fire this week following a shooting that she herself said should not have happened. In a statement tonight, Harteau said, "I've decided I am willing to step aside to let a fresh set of leadership eyes see what more can be done for the MPD to be the very best it can be."
Okay. That's nice, interesting. We know the priority of politics now. I spoke about it earlier before the break. So she's saying, okay, he was well-trained, but we don't act like this. It would seem to me, however, that at first blush, what you're doing is you're trying to justify something. What would that be, according to old BZ? That would be a Somali Muslim cop that many would say needn't be justified. So what is she saying? And further, what are the local media saying about this particular Somali officer? What do we know about him? Is the media suppressing facts?
So what the comment on the show last night was that we shouldn't be mentioning.
Now, I need to mention this up front. This is an Australian interview from Down Under that I happened to find, and this is that country's take on what happened to essentially their citizen, the Australian woman, the victim in this case.
That the media should not have mentioned that the policeman who murdered the Australian girl was Somali, born in Somalia and went to America. And the idea being that by mentioning this, you were somehow playing into Islamophobia or whatever, because the guy's a Muslim and proud Muslim, and in fact he was touted very proudly by the Minnesota police officer force as our new Somali-born police officer a couple of years ago. This is a great thing.
Yes. Now, problematic now? It wasn't very problematic then, and they had no problem, that is to say, this police department, touting the fact that we had a Somali Muslim on the force. Now that you have a bad incident involving that, you can't mention that in retrospect.
Then he's had 3 complaints against him, one of which appears to involve battery and assault and possibly kidnapping of a woman who's complained. So there's clearly something wrong with this particular individual when it comes to women.
Wait, did you happen to hear that before in any of the other American media? No, you didn't, which is why I'm playing it here for you first.
His partner was...
By the way, what do we know about Muslims and women? I think you know.
Was freaked out when he leant across him and shot a woman in pajamas who was, trying to talk to them through the car. So the idea that the media should somehow suppress... I don't say you have to draw conclusions, but the idea that the media should suppress, for political correctness reasons, information about an individual who is involved and has committed a horrendous and very puzzling crime, to me is completely wrong. The media should be putting all the facts out there until we know the truth, but there's no way the media should be shutting down information because it's politically sensitive.
So what happened is Harto faced several questions about her absence, in the days following the shooting. And that sparked a lot of anger and a demand for answers in the city and in Damon's home country of Australia. She said she had been backpacking in a remote area, it was challenging to return, and that she had been in touch with her command staff. That was the excuse for former Chief Harto. Priorities. She had priorities. The article goes on. Damon had called 911 twice late Saturday to report a possible sexual assault in the alley behind a house on Minneapolis's southwest side. Nora, who was in the passenger seat of the squad car, shot at Damon through the driver's side window. Nor has declined to speak with the state's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which is handling the investigation. His partner, Matthew Herity, told investigators he was startled by a loud sound right before Damon approached the police vehicle. Now, I also have some information to regale about this. Perhaps that's Nor's right not to speak in Minnesota. I'm not sufficiently cognizant with the Minnesota laws, but I can tell you about California. That maybe he's right there, but it is not his right in California. When I was in homicide, I happened to be tasked with quite a number of OIS incidents. Those are officer-involved shooting incidents. I had to be well-versed in the training behind OIS incidents, as well as POBR. That's the police or the peace officers' Bill of Rights in California, because they cannot conflict. You must withhold and uphold everyone's rights in this particular case. However, under POBR and under California, the way we handle OIS incidents, officers have a right to determine not to speak to me in detail, but they do have to tell me this. They have to tell me about the firearm. They had to tell me about the place They had to tell me about the position, the backstop, what it is that they had behind whatever it was that they were shooting at, the number of rounds fired, location of suspect, and the like. Do you see an issue starting to emerge here? I think I do.
Protests continue in Minneapolis over the fatal police shooting of an Australian woman, Justine Damon, who had called 911 to report an assault. The officer who pulled the trigger, Mohammed Noor, is on administrative leave pending the investigation, and the police chief stepping down at the mayor's request.
I note that some in Minneapolis have lost confidence in police leadership. For us to continue to transform policing and community trust in policing, both the chief and I concluded we need new leadership at MPD.
And for more now, I'm joined by Vincent Hill. He's a former Nashville police officer and host of the Beyond the Badge podcast. Vincent, good to have you here.
Now, did you understand what the mayor said? That was the mayor of Minneapolis who just said we've lost confidence in our chief of police. Hence, Chief Harteau now gone. This is an expert that you're going to hear. Someone has actually done the job, and he's going to weigh in what he believes occurred in this incident.
That with me, there's so many questions here. This officer Noor had 7 months training. How does something like this happen? And how does the police chief's resignation, her name is Janae Harteau, how does that solve the problem?
Well, first, I don't think the resignation solves anything. Policing is the hardest job in the world.
Stop. I have to weigh in at this point. Now, this may seem like minutia, but I'm going somewhere, and it all will tie in. When you go through an academy, the academy, depending on where you are, what department, is going to be anywhere from minimum post requirements in California now, I think, about 15 to 1,600 hours. And you go to a regional academy or a specific academy under a given department. And that translates to literally months of training under post. Those individual things that you learn are called domains. So you may have a domain about ACB. You may have a domain, well, you do have a domain about EVOC. You're going to have a domain about domestic violence. You're going to have a domain about firearms, etc. And then once you've graduated the academy, then you're placed into a training venue on the street. That's another 3 months. And you go with different training officers while you're there. And you're either washed out or you happen to make it and you exceed and move on to another TO, etc. Further, you're on probation for an entire year. So the department or departments who are employing you in California have a full year to determine whether or not you're a keeper, so to speak. Now, there are 3 forms of negligence. And each one, departments, at least in California, are well aware of these 3 critical domains of negligence, the likes of which departments, police departments, sheriff's departments, etc., are sued. There's negligence in hiring, there's negligence in training, and there's negligence in retention. And I would suspect that there are issues which may or may not come out about this particular individual. Now, why am I going again into such detail about this? Well, tell you what, rather than me, let's let this particular officer pull the curtain aside just a bit.
Nothing, there's no training, there's no book, there's no college degree that will tell you you have to either take a life, not take a life, or your actions could cause your death within split seconds. There's no other job like that in the world. As far as his training, 7 months, I don't really find that odd. A lot of departments have far less. For example, when I was in Nashville, the requirements were...
Stop. Maybe so. But the big question is, what training did he receive as opposed to the training of everyone else? That's the critical question. And we know what they said earlier. They said this man was fast-tracked. That is a phrase. Remember that phrase. It's not the overall time. It's, did you treat this individual like everyone else?
A 2-year degree or 3 years of military. I had both at the time, so I really don't question the actual training here. I think there's a much bigger underlying issue.
What's that?
I think the officer overreacted clearly. I mean, he was...
Okay, given. I have to ask again, why?
Responding to a call of a female possibly being sexually assaulted. He's approached by a female. So at some point you should have said, was it the caller or was it the possible victim that is approaching me?
Either way, you figure either of those characters, if you will, in this plot, they were non-threatening.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't have any indication, any report that she did anything threatening that would lead that officer to believe there was a threat against his life.
In the scenario...
That's a critical issue in this case.
Scenario is, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've got two officers sitting in their patrol car in a dark alley. You've got the partner who is the driver, and he also is with 7 months training, it's my understanding. So the partner is driving, and then you have, whose name is Officer Matthew Harity, and then you have Noor, who's in the passenger side, right?
Correct.
And the woman, Justine, comes towards the driver's side. So now your question is, how does Officer Noor, how is he even with his gun drawn in the first place while sitting in the car?
Yeah, absolutely, because departments don't train officers to shoot outside of a vehicle, right? It's forbidden in a lot of departments, if not...
And that is an interesting aspect, is it not?
Not all departments. And it's not a natural reaction to unholster your weapon while seated in your vehicle. So I question, was he already unholstered when he pulled into that dark alley?
So you said it's not unnatural, or is that something that they would normally do?
No. It's not something police would do. It's not a natural thing. I'm sorry. It's not a natural thing to unholster my weapon while seated in a police car. It's not even something police are trained to do. So I question, was he already unholstered when he approached that alley?
True. Stop. There is not one scenario, not one bit of training under post in any domain which addresses the firing of a firearm within an automobile. Not one. I only speak of California, though. I don't speak of any other state.
Okay, and by the way, the police chief's name, her name is Janae Harto. She has resigned. So many questions again, as I said, Vincent. How do you prevent something like this from happening again? Is it better situational or strategy training? Is it extended time in the academy, more experienced faculty, more incentives to keep veteran officers on the job?
Well, I think there were a lot of issues with this shooting. You have two individuals, two officers who had both been on the force less than a year.
Right.
I mean, when I was in patrol, I had to do 6 months with a field training officer.
Stop. He makes an excellent point. On my department, again, speaking only from California, and my federal training, my local law enforcement training, you did not put two rookies in a car together. Seldom, unless for whatever reason there was some amazing amount of pressure, or there was somehow some kind of statement to be made.
2 rotations every 2 months with the field training officer. So when you have 2 officers that have the same amount of experience, there's a big problem in itself.
And maybe that is perhaps why the mayor asked the police chief to resign. We're not sure of those details. I do want to pull up some reporting by the Minneapolis Star-Tribune saying the Minneapolis Police Department has struggled in recent years with a shrinking pool of applicants for job openings. A pension change that spurred a wave of retirements among peace officers statewide in 2014 dropped the Minneapolis police ranks to their lowest total in nearly 30 years, and the department was facing with hiring nearly 100 officers. And we're certainly not, piling on to the Minneapolis Police Department. You have many officers.
Stop. Trust me when I tell you that's a story for another time, and don't think that I'm not in the process of writing a post about that particular issue, which is a major issue these days in law enforcement.
Out there doing a stellar job and working very hard to protect and serve. But you also have police departments around the country laced with problems like this. Not enough, they're losing officers to attrition and to budget cuts. How do you fix that?
Well, you can have as many officers as you want, right? You're going to always have the same problem when you have split-second decision-making. If that right person is not making the right decision at that moment, we're going to always have these conversations. We're going to always question what police are doing. That's the bigger issue. No one's realizing that police only have a split second to make those decisions, and then they want to question police for months, for years. It's a bigger issue than just training and numbers.
What's going to happen to this officer?
I think this officer actually is going to be charged. I mean, as an officer myself, a former officer, I can't articulate anything that would have made him think there was an imminent threat against his life or his partner's life.
That begs an excellent question. And it's funny because in the middle of July, literally the middle portion of July, that's pretty much the last time we've heard anything about this on the national venue. So you have to ask yourself, this doesn't appear to be a Ferguson-like event, and I don't see a caterwauling nationally and locally that officer must be removed immediately and prosecuted. Step back. Do the politics. Ask yourself this question. Are there politics involved? Because you know my triumvirate of responsibility and my triumvirate of negligence. Okay, so it's been a long way. I've got about 4 minutes to go to wrap this up, unless I do overtime, which I'm not inclined to do tonight. So finally we get here from townhall.com. Listen to this. Minneapolis mayoral candidate, maybe cops should just leave their guns in the car. This particular author, Matt Vespa, says this. Is this guy high on drugs? That's the only explanation for this nonsensical policy proposal regarding law enforcement coming out of the Minneapolis area. Mayoral candidate Raymond Dane pretty much put forward a policy that would disarm police, requiring them to leave their firearms in their car. The most striking proposal came from Raymond Dane, a state legislator who finished first in the Minneapolis DFL's no-endorsement convention on July 8th, beating out Hodges council member Jacob Fry and Tom Hoke, and attracting more than a third of the support from party insiders. We must divest resources, disarm officers, and dismantle the inherent violence of our criminal justice system, Dane said in a statement Friday. He later elaborated on what sounded like a call to take guns from cops, adding that he is not advocating against police officers having access to weapons when they need them. This is now a quote. Officers don't need to carry guns on their person all the time, Dane said Tuesday. Currently, officers carry all sorts of assault weapons in their cars. So why can't one of those weapons be the sidearm? It's important that we begin to have a conversation, and I would say that all things are on the table. Everything, as far as Representative Dane is concerned. So he believes there has to be police reform. He believes that guns need to be
sweeping changes from the top down. Candidates running for Minneapolis mayor going on the record to say there are problems with the current culture of policing.
And Fox 9's Christina Palladino reports State Representative Raymond Dean claims not all officers need guns.
Representative Raymond Dean is one of several candidates running to beat Minneapolis Mayor Betsy Hodges in the fall. He recently won the support of voters at the Democratic Farmer Labor Convention, and now his call to disarm police of their side guns is garnering major attention.
I'm not saying that they don't have access to that, because just like they have access to more lethal forms of weapons in their cars, I would believe that they would still have access to their gun in their cars.
Stop right there. I have a video that I do want to play before I go away. So yes, we are going to go into a little bit of overtime. I don't expect that there's going to be more than about 5 minutes of overtime, because on the links of this, while I'm moving one particular direction, I want to wrap it up, and I want to show you, I want to illustrate to you verbally, orally, what other people are saying like this. like this individual.
Dean says there needs to be drastic changes in how officers are trained. He would be open to officers using other means to protect themselves, like a nightstick or pepper spray.
I think that as we begin to look
Things, of course, they already have.
at how we change policing and how we get officers to not react, to use their gun in situations, but learning skills around de-escalation training and all of those types of things, I think.
And I'm going to tell you something just before we go after the top of the hour. I'm going to go into overtime. I'm going to play a video. And I'm going to tell you exactly how this is affecting local law enforcement right now, because it is. It's affecting local law enforcement and local officers. And trust me, if it's affecting me and my former department and the other officers here, it's going to be affecting you very shortly in wherever it is that you live.
Very important.
Currently sitting in City Hall is Mayor Betsy Hodges. She's trying to keep this office and disagrees with Dean's proposal.
And if we're going to talk about changes in gun policy, we shouldn't start with police officers who will then be operating in a world with people who have guns.
Hodges says her efforts to keep dialogue open and transparent, as well as bridge the gaps of racial inequality, will bring lasting change to police and community relations.
Opponents are running on ideas that either work that I'm already doing or things that we are already doing as a city. And because we agree that the transformation needs to happen.
Dean says the details of his no-gun proposal are still in the early stages. And
Let me stop for a second. It's 10 o'clock on the Pacific Coast. It is 1 o'clock on the left coast. You are listening to the SHR Media Network, and you are listening to the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon live on the SHR Media Network.
He wants to sit down with police officers and come up with a strategy that keeps both the community and law enforcement safe. But the head of the police union, Lieutenant Bob Kroll, says there's not a chance this idea would fly with any cop.
I don't think the people in Minneapolis logically are ready for anything like this. Who would ever do the job of policing again? I mean, it's absolutely an absurd thought.
Fox 9 reached out to several of the other candidates running for mayor. All agreed that there needs to be substantial reform within the police department, but they say stripping officers' guns is going too far.
But wait. It's an idea, isn't it? It's now an idea that's out there. It's out in the firmament. And it's not the only one. Okay, look, I'm going to be honest. Quite a number of persons, like I said, have asked me to weigh in on this shooting involving Noor. And I served not in the military, but 41 years in law enforcement. And I do have something of a perspective from the front lines, and that's this. No matter how Noor was trained or whatever his reputation may have been or not been, an individual sitting in a vehicle shared by a partner deigns to reach across and in front of said partner cranks off rounds within the unit is one of two things. Brilliant in terms of officer safety if this was a true threat, which apparently it is not, or he is massively problematic, bordering on unhinged or perhaps even insane. And I'm going to have to suspect the latter. Most everyone, trust me when I say this, most everyone in that department now knows just about everything involving that officer, Officer Noor. And there are few secrets you're going to discover, and all cops know this, when life is on the line. And I also suspect this. And I'm trying to be as kind as I can. It's late at night. Due to his incomplete training regimen, that is to say, the fast-tracking that his department already admits to having done, trust me, there was a lot that was known about this guy, Noor, before he even opened the door to his first cop car, his first Crown Vic. That said, I highly suggest each and every leftist urban rat cage issue their police and disarm them completely. Maybe this guy has a good idea. Take the guns. Give them short truncheons. Give them whistles. A nice dark hat like Scotland Yard has. You know, give them, this is a good idea, give them smart cars or bicycles and tablets and social media, okay, and sarcasm. Sarcasm can be a weapon. Not too much sarcasm, though. You wouldn't want to offend anybody. And in terms of this great disarm the police department and remove their police equipment, this experiment, I suggest all of these cities first. You first, Minneapolis. You first, San Francisco, Chicago, New York. How about you, Detroit? Baltimore, that's a great city for doing that. Los Angeles, and of course, D.C. I'm not kidding. It's already been suggested. There are people pushing the Chicago Police Department to be completely unfunded. I shite thee not. Not at all.
Come, John Yang is there, and Brianna Champion is the organizing co-chair of the Chicago chapter of the Black Youth Project 100. She helped organize last night's protest at police headquarters and is joining us now. Brianna, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So we see the outrage, the anger when it comes to Mayor Emanuel. Is seeing him out of office the main goal, or is there more that you're really striving for as a priority right now?
Oh, wait, there's more. Right?
No, so getting Mayor Rahm Emanuel to resign is definitely not the main goal of the movement right now. So in Chicago, police receive 40% of our city's budget to remain operational. That is completely unheard of and unacceptable. One of our major demands is that...
By the way, I checked just to see if that's true. That's bullshit. It's public service that receives the greatest bulk in the city of Chicago.
Police be defunded, and that money used to fund police be used to fund black futures and be used to fund our communities and things that we need.
Only black futures, because, you know, Black Lives Matter.
Are you encouraged by the Justice Department's focus on what's happening in your city? And does that effort from the Obama administration resonate with the demonstrators on the ground there?
Yeah, I think it's important that the Department of Justice investigate the Chicago Police Department. I believe that it'll bring national attention to our efforts, but it's not gonna, we still have a lot of organizing work to do on the ground.
So what's next? What should we be looking for as the people across this country and in Chicago specifically want to know where your movement goes next?
Yeah, young folks will continue to protest. We'll continue to demand that Rahm Emanuel resign. We also are really impediment, and it's really important that Anita Alvarez, who is in charge of making sure that these officers get off the streets, is important. She's fired as well, and it's important that the city thinks more about where it uses its money, especially for our young black folks in Chicago. So you can expect to see more protests. You can expect to see us show up to the polls. Yeah, so those are a few things that you can expect from young folks in Chicago.
Brianna Champion is joining us right now. We very much appreciate your time again.
Yeah, okay, isn't that a great idea? You know, I kind of think the best summary was that particular lieutenant who spoke earlier. He said, I don't think the people in Minneapolis are logically ready for anything like this. Who would ever do the job of policing again? It's absolutely an absurd thought. Is it really? In parting, I want to tell you this. Because it's affecting my former department and another department inexorably linked to my department. I'm broadcasting in the belly of the beast, behind enemy lines in occupied Fornicalia. This particular studio of the SHR Media is no more than, say, 3 miles from the belly of the beast downtown, the Bill Mill in Sacramento, California. There we have the Sacramento Police Department. We also have the Sacramento Sheriff's Department. Now, here's what's happening to the Sacramento Sheriff's Department, and I know this for a fact. They're taking the shotguns out of the vehicles, out of the patrol vehicles, and they're going to replace them with less than lethal force, beanbag shotguns. When I was range master, I already created any number of reports indicating that this is a poor decision. You need a shotgun and weapon like this in the automobile, but they're going to remove the shotgun itself and instead give them a beanbag shotgun which shoots around, which is like getting hit with the end of a truncheon at about 500 feet per second. It's going to hurt a lot. That's where we're going. But wait, there's more, right? because the last qualifying line of people that went down to our range to qualify asked, hey, where's the shotguns? And the reply of range staff was, well, we're not qualifying with the shotgun this time. They're taking the shotgun away from us. Really? Really? Oh, then how are you going to train on the beanbag shotgun, which shoots an entirely different round? How's that going to work out for you, Sacramento County Sheriff's Department? Finally, but wait, there's more, because the sheriff has decided this is a good idea. The Sacramento Police Department is saying, that's a good idea too. Why didn't we think of it? So if you think this stuff can't come to your own neighborhood, if you think this stuff can't affect you, and if you think this stuff isn't starting to spread like a terrible virus, oh, you are just so damn wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, thanks for listening to the bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon tonight, Tuesday, on the SHR Media Network. My massive, massive thanks and props to thriller author Terrence McCauley, who was kind enough to spend 45 full minutes with me in the Saloon tonight and speak about his novels. Again, thank you, Terrence, ever so kindly. If you want to contact me, it actually works now. You can send me an email, bz@shrmedia.com. I'm on Twitter at bzep, B-Z-E-P. You can also read me on my blog at bloviatingzeppelin.net. Promotional consideration by Lockheed Martin Skunkworks and the Boeing Company. If it ain't Boeing, I ain't going, and my tiaras are by My Little Pony. Thanks to my personal KC-135 Kettle One refueling team, and you know what's going to be happening in less than an hour, don't you? Thank you ever so kindly for listening live. Thank you for being involved in the chat room. Thanks for listening in podcast. I apologize for not being in chat very much. I was busy. All of you, thanks for listening. God bless. God bless. Take care. You be safe.
Everybody quiet down now and get some sleep.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, Mama. Good night, Ben.
Good night, everyone. Good night, Mama. Good night, Daddy.
Good night, children. Good night, Daddy. Good night, Elizabeth.
Good night, John Boy. Good night, Jim Bob. Good night, Jim Bob.
Good night, Jim Bob.
What's going on? I was asleep. What's everybody doing?
Good night,
Good night, Jim Bob.
Good night, and good luck.